There's other issues also with the peace deal that we don't want to forget, which is the POWs. Obviously, then also respecting Armenian sovereignty throughout the process. Armenia needs to make its own decisions. Those decisions should not be enforced upon them.
72% of Americans cannot find the United States on a world map. So if they can't find the United States, and that means 50 states, let's take West Virginia, one of our smaller states. That's the size of Armenia. So let's take West Virginia and drop it into 193 nations in the world and ask an American to find Armenia. They have no clue where it is.
And one thing is very clear. When Christians are being persecuted, the persecutor isn't concerned if they're Presbyterian or Methodist or Catholic or whatever.
Denominations don't matter at that point.
You all love Jesus at the end of the day.
Right.
You all follow Jesus at the end of the day, and that's the number one marker for that.
What makes it, I think, even more dangerous, you have a very unpredictable enemy. It's almost against their character to have peace or to want peace. I think the United States is helping put some pressure on them, for sure, and that helps. But you still have an undependable neighbor.
Welcome to Conversations with the Tufenkian Foundation, where we speak with the people and partners shaping Armenia's future from the ground up. My name is Rupen Janbazian, and you could watch and listen to all our episodes on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Joining us today are two very special guests, David Barton, who is the best-selling author, historian, and founder of WallBuilders, and Matias Perttula, the director of Save Armenia. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Good to be with you.
Good to have you. Yeah. Both David and Matias have been traveling with a delegation of Christian leaders organized by Save Armenia and with ground support by the Tufenkian Foundation. They've come to witness conditions firsthand and amplify the call for justice, solidarity, and support. Today's conversation comes a day after our guests returned from Syunik, where they met with displaced families, local and state leaders, and borderland communities facing extraordinary challenges. And folks listening, if you find this conversation meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share it as widely as possible. It really helps reach more people who care about Armenia's future and want to hear voices from the ground. David, Matias, welcome, and let's dive right in. So you've just returned from Syunik to Yerevan. You visited villages like Svarants. You visited landmarks like the Tatev monastery. What struck you most about the people and the places you encountered there? Was there a particular moment that captured the gravity or the hope that you witnessed?
Would you like to go first?
What struck me was the simplicity, but also the danger. And I mean, when you're looking across the borders, an enemy that wants you gone, that is a dangerous place to be. The people we met with, very simple. I grew up in the country. I like that. They're very sincere, very genuine, hardworking. And I think with Tufenkian, the opportunities they're having now for many of them, that's the thing. It was just interesting to see the revitalization of a dying community because this is such a dangerous area and such a rural area with so little infrastructure. So it was really good to see the people and see their commitment. It was really good to see that.
Yeah, I'd agree with David. This is my second time to Armenia, and I think one thing that always strikes me, number one, is the resilience of the people. It's incredible to see that. And as you tour monasteries like Tatev, you grow even a deeper appreciation to the commitment that the Armenian people have to their faith, Christianity being the first Christian country in the history of the world. And you hear so many stories from history of where people stood by their faith under some terrible circumstances. And as a Christian, I'm so encouraged by that because life can be very difficult. But even in the villages, as David said, people's resilience there and moving forward in life and developing and striving forward, even in the presence of great danger from neighboring country in Azerbaijan, life goes on, and you could really see that. I mean, everywhere you go, you find new buildings are being developed, new communities are being developed, and this is all under the shadow of a great threat, and that's amazing to see.
You both mentioned threats. You both mentioned dangers. What struck you most about that? And was the danger really felt while you were there? Was that something that perhaps that you hadn't experienced before? You're both from the United States. there are different types of dangers in the United States. What was different about the danger that you witnessed there?
I guess for me, something that really strikes the reality of the situation is when you drive down to Tatev. There's a portion of the road where you can see the military installations, and you really get a feel like, okay, things are real. Like we're in a tough spot right now.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what really struck me was what makes it, I think, even more dangerous. You have a very unpredictable enemy.
Right.
And despite peace negotiations and peace talks, it's almost against their character to have peace or to want peace. I think the United States is helping put some pressure on them for sure, and that helps. But you still have an undependable neighbor. And that creates, and I think that's probably why that has been a shrinking region, because you just don't know what they're going to do, and it is so narrow at some places you could be cut off. And so having someone that could possibly exert some serious pressure against that neighbor helps. And I think right now that the Trump administration has been aggressive in doing that, and I think that helps. They're pushing for peace. We met with some of your national leaders who think that a peace deal is close, and I hope that it is. And then I hope it's respected once it is, because so often, even after peace is reached, there's no guarantee it stays there. You have to depend on the character of your enemy.
Right.
And so I think that's the most unpredictable part of that, is you have a track record of an enemy who doesn't like you, who wants you gone, who wants the entire country gone. And can you reach some kind of a peaceful agreement with them? And I think you got to. You have to. But at the same time, it's trust. It's the old axiom we have in America: trust but verify. We'll believe it, but you're going to have to prove it to me. And I think that's what makes life there also very tenuous, is knowing the type of enemy you have.
Right. And I think we'll get back into a little bit about what is being done stateside about all this. But before that, I think it would be interesting for our listeners to hear about Save Armenia, which is the organization that put all this together, this delegation together. Matias, tell us about Save Armenia and what brought this delegation of Christian leaders, thinkers to Armenia at this specific moment, in this post-war and, a moment where we're looking for peace, really. And what were the goals of the trip, and do you think they've been met?
Yeah. Save Armenia, we do a lot of things, but our main focus is really to rally the Christian church leaders, evangelical specifically, but other church leaders as well. And when I say church leaders, they're ministry leaders, they're pastors, they can, have different types of NGOs that they work in, so on, and really rally these people and bring them to Armenia. And our delegations are kind of framed as fact-finding missions. So we want them to come here, see Armenia, discover it, fall in love with it, and then take that message home and just raise awareness among their networks, among their friends and their allies, and really be the voice of Armenian Christians in the United States. And the big part for us there is, we're driven by that reality that, well, first of all, we're driven by the gospel. We want to stand by our brothers and sisters who are going through a very difficult time. I personally believe that the U.S. needs to be more active, not just in Armenia, but with the persecuted church in general. So many Christians are under threat around the world, and unfortunately, those numbers only keep going up. I won't cite every single country, but Armenia is certainly in one of those categories. And in this case, you're the first Christian country in the world. You're, a country of 3 million people with a huge diaspora community that's very aware, but we need to bring in our Christian partners and allies into it. So have we met the goal? Absolutely. I think everybody on our delegations, they always fall in love with this country and with the people and with the Christian history of this beautiful country. And almost, I would have to say that everybody who comes, they go back home, and they're even calling us after the trip. What can we do? Can we sign a letter? Can we write an op-ed? Can we do anything? And we will always oblige. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned op-eds, and so I want to ask David about something that you recently wrote. You penned an op-ed recently in the Daily Wire. It was titled "Why Christians Must Stand with Armenia," and in it you laid out both the historical significance of Armenia as the world's first Christian nation, but also about the urgency of defending Armenia today. I'm not sure if you knew, but the piece has garnered like 300 comments, and it sparked quite a conversation online. What prompted you to write that piece, first and foremost, and what kind of response have you received personally?
I haven't received any response, literally, because I've been gone since that piece came out. We did this piece just before we left, and so I have not seen anything on it. I've been focused here on Armenia, and I wrote that piece before I came here, but there were several things that I knew were true, not the least of which is Christians have to stand together around the world, and particularly when you guys are a country of your size and you're surrounded with so many enemies, and there is such extreme persecution. The targeting that you guys have had, the 120,000 thrown out, that's something that everybody's got to be involved with. But it's not something that catches most Americans' eyes or news. And it's not that Americans would not be supportive of it, they just don't know anything about it.
It's really a lack of awareness.
It's a lack of awareness for sure. And since I've been here, it's like, okay, what can I do? I have certain resources and assets that are available to me in America. What can I, as an American Christian, do to help here? And I'll just be real blunt. Americans are not always the sharpest knives in the drawer, if I can use that. We miss many things. And so I'll tell you what I think that most Americans, the problem they have with Armenia is this. 3 years ago, now we do a lot of educational work in the United States. That's what our organization does in many ways. And so we know that Americans are not nearly as well educated globally as most other nations and citizens. For example, 3 years ago, major national poll done, 72% of Americans cannot find the United States on a world map. So if they can't find the United States, and that means 50 states, let's take West Virginia, one of our smaller states. That's the size of Armenia. So let's take West Virginia and drop it into 193 nations in the world and ask an American to find Armenia. They have no clue where it is. And I was that way. Till I got here, I had no clue where Armenia was. I knew of it historically, but I did not know where it was. I had not met any of its people. Well, I met people because we have Armenians working for us at our office. So I know something about it. They were so excited we were coming. But for me to put my finger any place on a map and say this is it's just, and that's the way it is. If they can't find their own country, they sure can't find somebody else's country.
Right.
And so that's part of the problem is getting them connected. Once you can get them connected, so some of the things we think we can do, and so many in our group, we can bring leaders back here. And as we have met with many of your civil and spiritual leaders this week, as those connections become clear and you see what's going in Armenia, then there's the spiritual aspect, but there's the geopolitical aspect as well. And both of those are things that we think we can help with and bring leaders back. In our case, we are very connected with both federal and state legislators across the United States. And those are people who can do some things that can help that the average citizen can't. And if we can do that, let's do that. And so that's been part of it for us, is just finding out really where things are, what's going on, traveling, seeing all the things that we've been taken to see, spiritual stuff and political stuff as well, meeting with leaders in both spheres. It has been absolutely phenomenal.
I'm happy to hear it. You mentioned bringing leaders over, but you also mentioned education stateside. Tell us a little bit about WallBuilders and what kind of work you do there, because I know that education is a part of that.
You know, one of the things that's really clear here in Armenia is you know your history, and you know it well. Americans don't know their history, and that is something we have dealt with for a number of years. If I can, and I'm going to kind of rag on America for a bit, but one of the things we deal with is all 50 states, we help try to create educational standards to help in those states. Because Americans are highly historically illiterate. But we have one of our states in the United States. Now, in the United States, each state passes its own laws for history and social studies and what they do with geography and English and all their languages. And they change those standards every 10 to 14 years, depending on the state.
Okay.
So one of our states just passed its new standards for the next 10 years. And in those new standards, it said that for the next 10 years, our students in this state will not study 5 of the biggest parts of American history: the American Revolution, or our Civil War, or World War II, or World War I, or the Holocaust. Those 5 things will not be studied in schools for the next 10 years for all the students in that state. So if they don't study their own history, how do they know anything about anybody else's history?
Mm-hmm.
And so part of what we do with our organization, WallBuilders, we take that name from the Bible book of Nehemiah, where the Nehemiah went back to rebuild things that had been torn down. America's knowledge of its own heritage is just gone. And so what we have in the United States, we have 2 very large world-class museums on American history. And so we have, it's considered the largest private collection in the United States of original documents for 500 years of American history. Now, 500 years for Armenia, that's like a teenager. You know, that doesn't count. But for America, that's a long time. And so we do lots of trainings and classes. We train teachers. We train college students. We train people from all spheres. And that's part of what we do to help people regain their knowledge. Now, Armenia, that's not an issue. You guys know your history, and you know what it means to you, and therefore you have a direction and a focus. America often drifts because it doesn't know who it is or where it's come from, and so that's what we try to do in America.
It's very interesting. Thank you for that answer. And from what I gather, both of you are drawing from your faith, your Christian faith, but also your firsthand experiences to raise awareness and to call people to action. So this question is to both of you. How do you view the role of Christian leaders in shaping global perceptions of Armenia's current challenges? And those challenges are issues of its sovereignty, things like heritage and history, but also human rights.
Like, what do we want to do with our leaders when we get back home? And what's kind of the do out from there? So what we want to do with this is we want to inform our leaders in Washington about Armenia and everything that the country is facing. Ultimately, it's the people that rule America. It starts with we, the people. We're a self-governing institution in the United States. So we are the government, so we get to decide what the government does.
Right.
You know, so that we want to make this a part of what our government should do, is to engage with Armenia, support Armenia, and ensure that this peace deal or the issues that they're facing come to a rightful conclusion. There's other issues also with the peace deal that we don't want to forget, which is the POWs. Obviously, then also respecting Armenian sovereignty throughout the process. Armenia needs to make its own decisions. Those decisions should not be enforced upon them. It's you're a sovereign country. You have your own constitution. You are your own culture, your own people. You make those decisions. And I think America will respect that. And they want to see Armenia do that. So,
I would say, too, one of the things that is important for where we are with the government is, from particularly a biblical Judeo-Christian viewpoint that we have, we believe that God created 4 different jurisdictions, if you will. He made the individual. Then he made man and woman, put them together, which is the family. Then in Genesis 9, he created civil government. First civil government in history, Genesis 9. And then what we would call maybe the church life, the temple life, where he creates the temple and says, hey, I want to be acknowledged in the nation. And so each of those has a different jurisdiction. The family is supposed to do one thing. It's different from what the government does. It's different from what the church does, but they all work together. And within those first principles, there are certain principles that we think that God has instilled throughout the scriptures and also even in nature, certain principles of freedom, of sovereignty, that you do have boundaries. Even animals in nature recognize boundaries. There are certain things they stake off. And so boundaries mean something. There are lines that mean, and religious freedom is a gift from God, and it should be practiced by every nation. And so that's a universal precept. And so as a result of our faith, there are certain principles we want to see respected, and that is borders. Lines do mean something. Private property means something. You can't just take it arbitrarily. Your faith means something. Respecting someone's faith and giving religious liberty and freedom to practice that without persecution. all the things that you guys are fighting for right now with neighbors around you that don't have those beliefs. For us, that comes from biblical foundations, and that's what we want to see preserved, because everywhere that's preserved, you have freedom, you have liberty, you have prosperous people, and that's what every nation needs and wants. And so we think that's the source of that.
You both mentioned sovereignty, freedom, about borders not being respected oftentimes by a hostile neighbor. Are there any narratives that you most want to counter, or any narratives that you've seen that you may want to amplify when you're back there? For example, are there any misrepresentations that you've seen of the Christian need to confront the faith circles and public discourse and some of the stuff that our hostile neighbors are doing to misrepresent what's happening?
That's a great question. I have a couple thoughts on this. Number one, be very open and transparent, but a lot of times in the evangelical circles, there can be ignorance, I'd say, a little bit of distrust of people coming from different segments of Christianity. I've worked in the international religious freedom field for well over a decade at this point. And one thing is very clear. When Christians are being persecuted, the persecutor isn't concerned if they're Presbyterian or Methodist or Catholic or whatever.
Denominations don't matter at that point.
You all love Jesus at the end of the day. You all follow Jesus at the end of the day, and that's the number one marker for that. So if there's a narrative that I'd like to break in the U.S. church circles is worship may look different in an apostolic church, but at the end of the day, it's glorifying God. It's bringing people closer to God. So I want people to understand that anybody who claims the name of Jesus is a Christian at the end of the day, and we should stand with them, whether their worship looks a little different. We may be crazy in the evangelical circles to the apostolic church, right? So, but at the end of the day, we all love Jesus. That's one big thing. On the political segments, which I think is already kind of being dispelled already, but a lot of times there's been this narrative that Armenia is nothing but a Russian satellite state or something like that. Well, that could not be further from the truth today. They want to create and forge their own path forward, and America should stand by that and support that.
Yeah, from the American standpoint, we have certain folks that we consider enemies. And Armenia, historically and traditionally, recently in the last generation too, has had to be associated by need with some of them. I mean, part of the Soviet bloc and what was going there. And Iran may be perhaps your most charitable neighbor. And in the United States, Iran is Satan himself. I mean, that's just the worst it gets. So, oh man, if Armenia is connected to Iran, that can't be. No, you have to understand the situation.
Right.
And Iran, for all of its hostility toward the United States, that's not the way they treat Armenia.
No.
And it's quite different. And so understanding that back home is something that has to happen, because most political leaders will look and say, oh, now connections with Russia and Iran, that can't be good.
Right.
But that's by necessity. And then you start seeing, you guys have some really pressing problems here. Energy independence is not the least of it. You have to have energy. You can't survive without. Where do you have to go to get it? Well, at this point, it's from people who are very hostile to you, but you have to have it. And those are things you have to have. And so understanding that and understanding the westward drift of Armenia and the fact they're trying to move that direction, but they have to have infrastructure to be able to do that. Who's going to give them the defensive weapons to take on big neighbors around them that may come after them? Sure. Who's going to help them arm themselves for self-defense? Who's going to help in so many areas? And those are big things that have to be dealt with. But they won't be dealt with in America until American leaders understand what's going here. And that's why we think bringing them here to see changed me. I'm not an American leader per se. I have a lot of influence in certain areas, and I go, I get it. I get it. And so there's some things I'm willing to do to help when I get back and see what I can do with some leaders to maybe move some things in that direction.
That's great. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. And really that was my next question too. So you've seen the situation firsthand. You've seen it with your own eyes. How exactly do you plan to bring this message back to congressions, networks, political leaders in the United States? And what is it that you're calling on them to do specifically? I think that would be interesting for our
Yeah,
listeners.
so I think one part is definitely educating, especially members of Congress and senators on Armenia and all of these details we've been discussing today. And then there's many more still that need to be discussed. Unfortunately, even members, they have their areas of expertise, and many times they don't understand, the geopolitics to the detail that they should understand when they're voting on a piece of legislation or working on an op-ed or whatever it is that they're doing. So that's one big thing, and I think with the leadership or the network of leaders that we've built and are continuing to build, we can really accomplish that. Same thing with the church. We want to bring the leaders here, obviously, with our delegations, but we also want to engage the church in the U.S. Just by being there. Number of resources that we want to give them on the history of Armenian Christianity, and even the recent events that have happened in Artsakh. And even today, we just found out something amazing is essentially a collection of recorded miracles that even happened during that time. And as soon as the gentleman mentioned that they have this, I nearly jumped out of my seat. I was like, please give that to me. I need that. Our Christian leaders back home need to hear these stories so they can understand and see how God's hand is over Armenia and over these people. While things look hard, they look almost hopeless, but in those moments, God is faithful. You may have been driven out of Artsakh by a vicious enemy, but God was still in that moment protecting and being with the people of Armenia and people of Artsakh. And I think those stories need to be told to the American people, American Christians especially.
Yeah, I think to really get the results that are needed, you have to grab someone's heart and their head.
Yeah.
And it's not enough to have one or the other.
Right.
So what can be done to grab the heart? Well, certainly bringing congressional delegations, others here to see that, other leaders, business leaders, others. And then in thinking through, there are certain areas where we have influence in the United States, not the least of which is among teachers. So why not create in world geography and world history a little section on Armenia? Because that is part of world history. We do a bad job of even covering U.S. history, but there's no reason we can't introduce it in the classroom because there's so much history. 2,600 years ago, you had a map with Armenia on it. Yeah, that's a lot of history. So if you start educating children about Armenia and traditionally and historically and who they've been and what they've been, and even the map we saw today showing the Garden of Eden in Armenia and the four rivers flowing out, nobody knows that in the U.S. So you go, wow, that's cool. I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible, the Garden of Eden. I didn't know Armenia. So that's a heart connection that you can do. Now it's through the brain as well, but you start connecting with things, and so I think education is one. Churches, there is a big push in America to support persecuted Christians across the world. Problem is they don't know where they are a lot of times. They know where some of them are. They know what's going on in Nigeria to some degree, the Congo Republic, other things where there's a lot of massacres and bad stuff. But we have days of prayer in America for persecuted Christians, so why not do a day of prayer for the Armenian church? Get the hearts of Christian parishioners connected to Armenia. They were connected to Afghanistan when the Yazidis and Christians there were being persecuted by ISIS. And so that's another way we can reach into churches and start having days of prayer for our brothers in Armenia. And for what's going here, Artsakh, the expulsion there. So that's another way of connecting a heart. And then when that happens, they're going to be talking to their legislators and say, hey, you need to really watch out for Azerbaijan. You need to support these people in Armenia. And so some of it's long-term. It'll take a few years. Some of it we think can be short-term. But you have to get the heart and the head both going to really get the results you want.
Just to wrap things up, there are folks listening or watching who feel moved, I'm sure, by all of this, but they don't exactly know where to begin. They don't know where or how, rather, they could support Armenia. What would be a starting point for someone that's looking to support Armenia? How could they be a part of this story? that you just told our viewers and our listeners?
Well, I think one thing would be great. First thing, they should come to Armenia, come visit Armenia, come experience it for themselves, get on a trip or a delegation and just explore this beautiful country. And especially if you're a Christian and you haven't been here, you should come. You need to come visit, because I think that's when it's going to really grab your heart. That's the biggest thing. The other thing, the more actionable item, I suppose, is, and I say this every time I give a presentation, and I'm sure some Americans are tired of hearing it, but you gotta call your congressmen and you gotta call your senators. You gotta make them aware, because you're their constituent at the end of the day. So they need to hear from you. So tell them that Armenia matters, and they need to be working on these issues. That needs to happen. You've got to sign those petitions, not just the ones that Save Armenia puts out, or sign the petitions. Advocate for the POWs. That needs to be solved immediately. The administration needs to know that Americans care about Armenia. They need to let President Donald Trump know. Post, tweet, blog, whatever you got to do. Raise awareness.
Yeah, I would add to that, having dealt specifically with Congress for a number of years, you have to remember, congressmen, we respect them as leaders, but they don't have superior knowledge. They're the average citizen that just got elected.
Right.
Last year before they ran for office, they were running a car dealership. They have no special knowledge of what's going on over here. So you have to treat them the same way you would as someone who sits beside you in a pew at church, someone that sits beside you on a bus. You have to help educate them. And that's why calling them gets their attention. They get 5, 6, 8 calls. They say, I need to look into this. I didn't know anything was going on. And so those calls are important. And don't blow it away and say, oh, there's 435 members of Congress. They don't listen. Well, their staff watches what those calls are. And when they get several on an issue, they will start briefing their member that you need to watch this because this is a growing issue. So I would send them back to the Daily Caller article where that we go through 4 really simple things you can do, including contact your leaders and tell them, hey, you really need to get involved here with this, because there are certain things, and to Trump's credit, he's, from everything we can see here, in talking to both your state and national leaders, the Trump administration is weighing in a positive, aggressive way, I think, for Armenia's behalf, that is good for the people. And so that helps. But the guys in Congress are the ones who appropriate the funds. Will it go to Azerbaijan, or will those funds go maybe to help get oil or get a nuclear plant here in Armenia? That's the kind of stuff the congressman can help with. And they can support the president if they know what the needs are. And so that's where the average citizen has a huge impact if they will simply let their voice, and don't just think, oh man, they got 790,000 people in district, they're not going to listen to me. I'm telling you, they don't get that many calls. They get calls that are artificially inflated when some group sends out an email on some LGBTQ issue or gender issue. They'll get the calls. They won't get them on issues like this. And so when they start getting calls on this, it does grab their attention. So I would send them a Daily Caller article and say, look at those 4 things there. Those are 4 easy things that can be done.
Thank you. And thank you both, really, for taking the time to share your reflections. Thank you for coming to Armenia. Your presence here and your willingness to learn, to listen, to bring over a delegation and to witness mean a great deal.
I got to say thanks to Save Armenia, because I wouldn't have come if they hadn't leaned on me to do it.
That's right.
And now,
Thank you
having
for
been
that.
here, I wouldn't trade it.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for helping those who are working to build a stronger Armenia, for working with them, for helping them, for supporting them. We really appreciate it. And if you listening felt like this was a meaningful conversation, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to help us reach others who care about Armenia and who care about Armenia's future. You can find conversations with the Tufenkian Foundation on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about our work and about Save Armenia's work, you could visit tufenkianfoundation.org and savearmenia.org, and follow both organizations on social media. We'll be back soon with more videos, with more coverage of the delegation, and more voices from the ground. So until next time, thank you for listening.